Good evening, everyone. This is Nicole Ali. I'm back with another video. This time it's about concussions and some concussions related to, as you can see in the picture, football. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, is a disease that does, as we know, it will affect anyone with a traumatic brain injury, such as people who participate in sports, football, boxing, even soccer. There was a movie called Concussion starring Will Smith where he played the doctor who, I believe, discovered this disease and was able to treat some of the football players for their symptoms of this disease. This article comes from the Science magazine, and it is about how concussions have been found to originate from ringing deep inside the brain. And they're using a specific type of modeling to model the brain and determine where the concussion affects the brain, which parts of the brain are affected by these concussions. So in the caption, it says, to model the motion of the brain, researchers started with measurements of blows to the head in football games similar to this one. This was published a few days ago. So they start off by saying, when a football player takes a hit to the head and gets his bell rung, quote unquote, it's more than an expression. Like a real bell, the player's brain can oscillate at different frequencies. A new modeling study finds. The results bolster the notion that concussions originate not so much from the collision of the brain with the skull, but in the stretching and shearing of tissue that the ringing causes deep within the brain. The researchers suggest that better helmets could be designed to dampen the most damaging low-frequency vibrations. The work could significantly simplify the modeling of concussions, says Philip Bailey, a mechanical engineer specializing in head impacts at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, who was not involved in the study. He says, to me, that's the main thing. It's the low frequencies that dominate, and you can stimulate the brain with just a few low frequency modes. So with a few low frequency modes, you can stimulate the brain, and that's how they can see how the concussion is affecting the brain, where these vibrations are occurring that are not normal. It goes on to say, every year, hundreds of thousands of Americans suffer concussions while participating in sports or other recreational activities. That is a lot. Most of them possibly male and younger than 30. I'm just throwing a number out there. In the popular conception, a concussion occurs when the cranium comes to a sudden stop and the brain crashes into it, like a car driver flying into the dashboard. That's exactly what I was thinking. So your brain, you are your brain, and your car is your skull. And if you are in a car wreck and you do not have your seatbelt on, you're going to either go through the dash, go through the windshield, or you're going to hit the dashboard, hit the steering wheel. So that's like your brain hitting up the inside of your skull. Imagine the force of impact, the bruising that is now on your brain. So it, of course, causes all types of trauma to the rest of the body because the brain speaks to the rest of the body. And now it may not be able to speak properly, or certain parts of the body won't be able to respond back to the brain. Then they say, for example, a violent rotation of the skull, as can happen when a skateboarder's head slams sideways into the pavement. This can cause more damage than a simple sudden stop. Clinical data, also suggests that concussions involve more than the surface of the brain, as their severity correlates with damage deeper inside, such as deformations around the corpus callosum, the bridge between the brain's hemispheres. So if you Google a picture of the brain, you'll see there's a small bridge of tissue called the corpus callosum, or corpus callosum, depending on how you pronounce it. This is where the two hemispheres, the left and right hemisphere of your brain, where they connect. The corpus callosum is affected not only when people have concussions, but it's also affected when people have epilepsy as well, when they have seizures. So they will remove the corpus callosum, or they will damage the corpus callosum on purpose in order to prevent seizures from one side of the brain affecting the other side of the brain. So here they're saying that clinical data suggests that the corpus callosum can be contributing to symptoms that you get following a concussion. But they weren't sure because those are just clinical trials. So they're probably looking at mice or rats for that. Not clinical trials, but clinical data. So they're doing animal work there. They haven't done a trial so far in the article. So they haven't worked with humans just yet, but to test their hypotheses. But they say here, to better determine what actually happens during a hit to the head, David Camarillo, a bioengineer at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, and colleagues collected data on real blows by outfitting 31 Stanford football players with mouth guards equipped with accelerometers and gyroscopes. Using data on 189 in-game collisions, including 2 that resulted in concussions, the researchers simulated how the brain responded mechanically to each hit, using data on the material properties of the various brain tissues derived mainly from cadavers. So they used dead people, dead tissues from dead people who had already died to do some of their analysis. So they used a dead person. Let's see. I haven't gone through this, so I'm seeing it real time, just like you are. It says they just have this picture here. I'm not sure what it's trying to explain, but it says in a hit that resulted in loss of consciousness on the left. So I guess that's the cadaver they're using. Excuse me. The corpus callosum and surrounding white matter appear to have oscillated at different frequencies, as denoted by the different shades of blue, whereas the regions seem to oscillate at the same frequency in non-injury collision. Okay, so the person who had the head injury is on the left, and the person without head injury, which is the cadaver, is on the right. This is not a well-designed study. Yeah, this is not well-designed at all, but okay, we'll move on from that. Each blow set the brain wobbling in a complicated way for a few tenths of a second, the team found. Researchers broke that motion down to dynamical modes, short-lived patterns of motion with distinct frequencies. When jolted, the brain oscillates most vigorously at about 30 cycles per second, roughly the same frequency as the second lowest key on a piano, the researchers report today in Physical Review Letters. On average, modes below 33 cycles per second soak up 75% of the total energy imparted to the brain. So they're saying that the brain vibrates at a certain frequency already, and when you upset it by having these hits to the head, you change not only the way the brain cycles within a second, but you can change its the energy output as well. And I think if you change the energy output of the brain, it has a long-term effect. So that's why they want to do this research. Then they go on to say, moreover, harder impacts excite more modes, says Mehmet Kurt, an expert in brain biomechanics at the Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey, and an author on the paper. That may be key, he says, because the different modes accentuate motion in different parts of the brain, potentially causing neighboring regions to oscillate at different frequencies. For example, the modeling of a hit in which a player lost consciousness shows that in that collision, the corpus callosum oscillated at a higher frequency than the surrounding white matter. Even though the oscillations last for just a few cycles, when neighboring brain regions vibrate at different frequencies, the stretching and shearing of those tissues increases, Kurt explains. So the stretching and shearing, the brain should not be stretching and shearing. Okay. That is a no-no. So the shearing of the brain, they literally mean like you're losing tissue. You're losing parts of the brain. You're losing the ability to use certain parts of the brain because it's being lost, or it's being damaged permanently, or it's being damaged irreversibly. So then it goes on, it says the analysis may be both bad news and good news for concussion researchers, Kurt says. He says, on one hand, we're saying this problem is more complicated than you might think. On the other hand, we're saying that we might have the right tool to study it. For example, Bailey says, by comparing the motions of different modes, researchers might pinpoint brain areas most susceptible to damage. Moreover, helmet manufacturers might aim for designs that damp out the most damaging frequencies, Bailey says. They should have already done that. They should have already had that done with all this technology and as expensive as goddamn helmets are right now. Especially think of the professional sports. Professional sports where they, except for basketball and soccer, where they have to wear helmets all these years. Okay. It goes on, says, however, the work comes with a caveat, says Bailey, who has written a commentary on the study, and they have that linked here, for the American Physical Society's website. To derive the motion of the brain from the accelerations measured during a hit, the researchers depend on estimates of the mechanical properties of brain tissue, such as their stiffness and propensity to soak up energy. For ethical reasons, those properties cannot be measured in living brains under injury-inducing conditions, Bailey notes. So the mechanical properties of brain material aren't anywhere as well known as those of steel and aluminum, he notes. To overcome that limitation, Bailey suggests researchers next validate their technique by applying it to lower impact collisions, which can be safely inflicted on subjects in the lab, and for which the material properties of a living brain under the appropriate conditions can be deduced from magnetic resonance imaging, and they spelled imaging wrong. So that's the MRI that you get in the hospital. Successfully putting the modeling to that test would increase confidence in its implications for harder hits, he says. That would be really interesting and probably the very next step. So they're on their way working to possibly treat CTE-like symptoms. I noticed they didn't use the term CTE because they don't want to bring attention to themselves, I think, in that way. Because CTE, discussing CTE is quite controversial. It's been controversial for a while. And they have not mentioned that here, but basically they're talking about CTE. That's once again, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy that players who have consistent and highly severe head injuries, they suffer from that. And there have been a few that have died. I remember a special about CTE. I think it was on CNN or MSNBC. They were speaking with a guy, and his father had passed away from CTE. His dad used to be a football player, and he passed from it. So, and there have been other cases as well of this happening. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section about this topic. Like, comment, subscribe. If this is your first time in my channel, don't forget to hit the red subscribe button. And also press the bell to be notified when I upload new videos or go live. With that, I'll let you guys have a good night. I'll talk to you later. And that's all. Bye.